If you've watched a few of the videos in this series, perhaps you've watched the whole series, thank you if you have, you'll have noticed a common theme. And the common theme is that most of these videos aren't videos that I would use as an atheist to explain my atheism, because they don't argue with the existence of God, they just argue with what the nature of God would be like if he does exist. And are specifically aimed at Christians more than anybody else, because I know that most people who watch them of a religious perspective would be Christians. What I want to do to sum up is to make the argument that the God that you worship and that the characteristics that you give him, that you ascribe to him, whether or not he exists, says a lot about you. In fact, it says as much about you as it does about the God himself. Let me give you an example. Imagine that your parents had been killed by a serial killer, perhaps. And imagine if I came to you and I said that I believe that your parents have been killed by a serial killer. Well, you probably wouldn't have a problem with that, even if you didn't actually believe that's how they'd been killed, because I would just be stating an opinion. But imagine if I told you that not only do I believe that, but I know the serial killer he's in jail, and I send him fan mail telling him how much I idolise him and how much I worship him. I think what you'd probably do is you'd probably try and beat the crap out of me. Now, my parents are still alive, but undoubtedly within 20 or 30 years they will be dead. And according to a lot of Christians, my parents will burn in, never mind being killed by a serial killer, they will burn in hell, they will be tortured for all of eternity. And many Christians will tell me this with a smile on their face as part of their good news package. Now, I actually think my parents are quite good people. And I say to these Christians who say these kind of things, look, don't you really see that what you're saying is actually rather offensive? Not because that you believe that this God exists, because you will also tell me on top of what you've already told me that you worship this God, that you praise this God, and sickest of all, that you tell this God how compassionate and loving he is. This God who is sentencing my parents to be burnt in hell because he can't abide to be around them because they haven't accepted his son as their saviour. They are going to suffer for all of eternity. And I'm not supposed to, as an atheist, be offended by you holding that perspective. This is what I mean when I say the kind of God that you worship says as much about you as it does about that God itself or himself. The same thing is true when we start going back to this subject of suffering that goes on in the world today, and the amount of suffering that some Christians seem to be prepared to accept and still stick by this mantra that their God is compassionate, that he's loving, and he's benevolent. It makes you wonder just what would have to go on before they'd move away from that. It makes you wonder, it makes some cynical atheists wonder, and perhaps I'm one of those cynical atheists, just whether all Christians truly do believe that God is as compassionate as they make out. If they do believe in God, is he really that compassionate, or are they perhaps saying it purely out of self-interest? Is the worship just an act of self-interest to get the individual into heaven and sod everybody else? You know, thinking about this, and this video rather than any other in the series, to some Christians this video could be, you know, almost the work of a devil worshipper. It could be the worst, the most acidic, most corrosive video on the whole of YouTube. And the reason, well, for a start, I'm no devil worshipper because I don't believe in the devil. There's no devil involved here. Just hopefully a certain amount of logic and rationale. But the reason I say it could almost be like some kind of acid is because while ever you don't think about it, whenever you don't think about these things, it's possible to worship God and think of him, if you're Christian, as benevolent and compassionate, as loving. But imagine if you watch this video and you start to think, well, actually, there doesn't actually seem to be a lot of benevolence and compassion in God. There seems to be, the way he works doesn't seem to be right. It seems to be what we would define as truly evil, absolutely evil, the amount of suffering that he lets go by. The fact that he condemns people to hell in this way seems evil. What am I to do now I've watched this video? Do I keep worshipping him and telling him how compassionate he is in the hope that I still go to heaven? But no, God's going to see through that, isn't he? My mind is now poisoned. I still believe in God, but but I can no longer claim to think that he's benevolent and compassionate. I can no longer go down on bended knee and truly say these prayers and think, yes, you are all these fantastic things, because I don't feel it anymore. Well, I'm not big-headed enough to think that that's going to have this effect on anybody out there. But what I do hope this video does is it does raise a few questions in people's minds as to what the nature of God truly is, if you believe in God, whether God actually exists, if your faith is based on these things in the first place, and finally, as I've said in this video, to think how what you ascribe to God reflects on how you are perceived by other people, because there are many Christians out there, particularly people of the Anglican community, people of the Church of England, who hold a very different viewpoint to God, and who would say to you that no, God doesn't send everybody to hell, and all these different things. If you have a very literalist perspective, you're signed up to all these things, and it really does say a lot about you and how you view other people, and how important you view other people, that you ascribe these things to God and you still worship him. With regard to this video and to all the videos in this series, if you've got any comments, I'd be really interested to hear them. Thank you for listening to this video, and thank you for listening to any others in this series. Thanks very much. Jim, over and out.